Are the Twitter files an underwhelming nothing burger? Can you claim the law designates personhood? And should people be forced to do business with people they hate? We answer these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. We go through our social media feeds. We find the best and the worst posts we can. We bring them to the show and we talk about why the good ones are so good and why the bad ones are so bad. My name is Donald. I'm here with my co-host Britt. And before we dive in, just a reminder to like and share and comment, all that good stuff. Help us out in the algorithm, makes a huge difference. And we love interacting with you. And that includes if you have any posts you want us to take on, whether you think it's a good take, a bad take, or you're not sure, we'd love to get those from you. It's always fun to get those. So feel free to send them to us wherever, Twitter, Discord, online, you can find us. So let's go into our first takes here. This one is in response to the recent Twitter files, which Elon Musk leaked directly to Matt. I believe his name is Taibbi. Is that right? I may be saying it wrong. Anyway, but he was tweeting all of these out bit by bit. And this man named Mike Rothschild had this to say about it. The real reason why many news outlets didn't touch the laptop story, the Hunter Biden laptop story, to be clear, continues to be that the chain of custody is a mess, the people pushing it were unreliable, and there was no way to tell what on the laptop was real and what was fake. But sure, let's all do this dance again. And this was in this second tweet was in the same thread. It was kind of an unhinged rant going on as the Twitter files were dropping. The second tweet reads, Taibbi seems to be writing this tweet by tweet. A half hour in, he's revealed that A, Twitter removed tweets regarding Biden and Trump that violated its safety rules, and B, a lot of Democratic voters worked at Twitter. The earth hasn't stopped shaking. So, Britt, did we get a big crock pot of nothing, or do you have a different opinion than Mr. Rothschild?
I think it's a bad take. I don't think it's as big as I don't think it's like I caught Colonel Mustard in the library with a smoking gun, and he's like, I killed this person, but it's pretty close, like you've got what's her name, Vijaya God, literally basically admitting that they, at the behest of certain political actors, both Republican and Democrat, trying to, exert their influence on Twitter to take down certain bad actors or what they deemed as bad actors. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right? And that's what we were all saying all along, So this guy that's tweeting, he's basically saying yeah, the stuff that you guys have been saying for the past, 3 years about what happened in the 2020 election and with the Hunter Biden laptop story, it's all true. And that therefore it's not a big deal. We all knew you were saying this. It's yeah, it's a big deal. So admit that, that there are outside influences. There is a cabal of people that are colluding to choose who gets to be in power, who does not get to be in power. I think this is also on par with, I don't know if you got to watch the Joe Rogan episode with Mark Zuckerberg, but Mark Zuckerberg literally admitting on Joe Rogan in front of 11 million people that, yeah, the White House does ask us to do certain things, and we do obey them, and we also shadow ban people. He tried to use a different term. He's like, I wouldn't call it shadow banning, but what we do is make sure that what people are posting can't be seen. That's shadow banning, dude. By the definition that I have, and that most people have, that's what shadow banning is. So
it's almost sounding freedom of speech is not freedom of reach-ish.
Yes, yeah. So I guess to this Mike guy, it's yeah, we've all known these things. We know that Twitter removed tweets. I would disagree that it violates safety rules because they don't remove plenty of things that violate its safety rules. It's that Twitter removed tweets on a case-by-case basis based on what kind of political influence or actor was influencing them. And because most of the people that work at Twitter are Democratic actors, it turns out that most of that skewed towards the Democratic Party or in favor of what they were trying to do. So yeah, we all knew this, and now it's all coming out, and the proof is in the pudding. And you guys have been trying to gaslight us and tell us that it's not happening, but it has.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with Mike Rothschild to know if this is willful deflecting and red herring and moving goalposts, or if this is actual sort of cognitive dissonance and cognitive disassociation from previous thoughts. But there's a lot wrong with this take. The first being, for years prior, especially even prior to the Hunter Biden laptop drama and other stuff, we were being told that conservatives were not being disproportionately censored. And because like the Daily Wire gets shared so much on these, and it's such a moneymaker, there's no way conservative voices are being censored. And that's just wrong based on what's been shown here. You can say it's not like their policy was to censor only conservatives, but you can gather that the reality is, because of the disproportionately high number of Democratic elites, alternative, in particular liberty voices, were silenced, while you leave up a few big conservatives like Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro or whatever. But there has been a disproportion. So the first thing is they denied that this disproportionate banning was happening at all, and that's what this revealed. So this second tweet kind of moves the goalpost for that, and says, and kind of denies their previous allegation. But the other problem is, um yeah, what you highlighted earlier, where it says his claim is that Twitter removed tweets regarding Biden and Trump that violated its safety rules. Clearly, that's not the case, because the safety rules were not explicitly laid out, and the White House was suggesting and wanting these quotes, or these tweets, quote, taken care of or handled. Excuse me, like, I've handled these, was the response they gave, and it wasn't a matter of did these violate safety rules. It was a matter of the White House wanted them gone. There's a big difference between how Twitter is going to process, like, me reporting, like, let's say Brit tweets something and I think that it's a threat, or I think it violates, safety rules. I'm going to report that tweet. They're going to look over it and think, okay, this was a user generated submission. We'll evaluate it. Actually, you know what? It's kind of obvious to us that Brit's just making a tongue-in-cheek joke referencing a piece of media. It's not a threat. We're going to dismiss that. Versus the White House sending something. Like, do you think there's not an imbalance of power between a user reported tweet and the White House emailing these contacts directly saying take these down? And the White House or any politician. I'm not
I wish
defending,
there
like,
was. I wish there was no imbalance, but
right.
there, yeah.
Yeah, there totally is, exactly. And I'm not defending this on the grounds of, like, well, it's okay when conservatives or Republicans do it either. Like, that's stupid. The government should be not in the business of manipulating or pressuring a company how to do its job. It's kind of like, this is fresh on my mind, so sorry for the really wonky example for anyone who's not in this world. But it's kind of like when Nintendo tells tournaments of games that they don't like. They're like, well, we're not telling you to shut down your tournament. We're just saying that if you're not licensed with us, there can be serious legal ramifications. But we're not telling you to shut down your tournament, right? And then they have no choice but to shut down the tournament, because they've basically had this implicit threat of force. That's what it's like anytime the White House is going to, or a politician is going to send these tweets to Twitter to ban. Yeah, it's not just a matter of them violating its safety rules. It's a matter of incredible pressure being put on from the only quote unquote legitimate monopoly on force in the country.
Yeah, people will say things like, "Oh, corporations are so bad," or like Twitter's a private company; it can do what it wants. And it's like, okay, what? And we've made this point on here before, but like, what entity can shut down your business with literally the snap of its fingers? It's like, oh, it's the government can. And so then you think about, okay, what's been going on with these social media companies, and you see, after the 2016 election, all of the executives and board members and folks like that being dragged before Congress to be interrogated for hours upon hours, with the implicit threat that we will shut you down or we will break you up. I mean, they literally say that we think you're too big, we need to break you up. So of course, it's after the mafia comes into your house and threatens you and your family, and then you see the mafia out at the grocery store and they say, "Hey, could you maybe pick up my grocery tab, today in the grocery line?" You're like, "I guess I have to." There's a
Right.
different thing that's going on there, right? The relationship is not one of equal ground. There's obviously some things that are not going that are not fair or out there or altruistic. And I think, like, I can't remember the exact timing on this. I was trying to look it up, but like, I remember in 2020, at the end of 2020, and then in 2021, you had the runoff in Pennsylvania. And once it became clear that the Democrats or the Republicans were not going to hold the Senate, and that they had lost Congress, um, like, then that's when the social media companies start taking action, right, on Donald Trump and all these different folks, which is really funny because it's like, okay, now we know who the big power player is, and so now we're going to choose, who we're going to cozy up to. So I think if anything, that's pretty obvious that who holds the power in this relationship. It's not the social media company.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the last thing I kind of want to go back to the first tweet and talk about my personal connection with all this. So, to remind the listeners, it's the real reason why many news outlets didn't touch the laptop story continues to be that the chain of custody is a mess. People pushing it were unreliable, and there's no way to tell if what was on the laptop was real or what was fake. Okay, that would be one thing if it was just if the entirety of the problem was that major outlets didn't run with it. That is a problem because journalism should be in its platonic ideal investigating things that could be unreliable, because guess what, that's what investigative journalism is. Investigative journalism isn't, well, we know all of the facts of this and therefore we can report on this right away and we need to invest. No, investigative journalism is getting to the bottom of stories that you don't know the entirety of. So let's report on the Hunter Biden laptop story. And then you can say as much as you want, this is unverified. These people haven't been reliable in the past, so take it with a grain of salt. But okay, but even if they didn't touch it, that'd be one thing. But they were actively suppressing people who were reporting on it. They were actively silencing people who were telling that. So it's not just a matter of, credible media outlets not wanting to run the story. It's a matter of credible media outlets and the ultimately, as was revealed, the government pressuring social media companies to suppress people who did want to do the investigative journalism. And this is no better highlighted and also debunks this whole, violating safety rules nonsense in the second tweet. That one of the screenshots lists 5 tweets, and the 5 tweets are ones that the White House wants taken care of, and they get it, quote unquote, handled. And number 5 on that list is actually a friend of mine. Shout out to him. His sort of online MO is squiggly line guy. And he is someone who's in the sort of liberty world and was big on the Austin Peterson campaign, among other things. And his tweet was banned. His account was entirely removed and banned from Twitter because he tweeted out one of the photos from that laptop where it was, and he censored it. It was Hunter Biden naked, but he censored it. He's like, he's like, I have some, decency. And in the background in this hotel is there's a child who does not seem like she is in an appropriate age to be
Yeah.
there. And he asked the question, how old does that girl look to you? That's what he did. So that didn't violate safety rules. It didn't violate, content nudity rules. It was censored. The problem was, of course, that it, highlighted something that was inconvenient to the power brokers at the time. And so that had to be
Yeah.
shut down by Twitter through government pressure, of course.
Yeah. Just one correction. I said Pennsylvania runoff. Pennsylvania, I don't think has runoff. It was Georgia. And it was on, it was, I think it concluded like January 7th or whatever. And then January 8th, they banned Trump.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, pretty funny.
Okay. Moving to the next one. This one comes from Casually Greg, is the Twitter handle. He is quote retweeting the Huffington Post, and the Huffington Post has a blog titled, "If Bush is a war criminal, then so are Truman, LBJ, Nixon, and Obama," with a follow-up headline or underline of, "Were the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki a, quote, breach of the rules of warfare? How about our use of Agent Orange in Vietnam or the secret bombings of Cambodia and Laos? Furthermore, since Obama has simply continued many Bush-era policies, does this make him guilty of the same crimes?" And I think this was an old Huffington Post, but he was just tweeting this just today. And he quote retweets this and says, "Yes, yes, they are. All of them. Every last dang one of them." And and so, what are you thinking about that?
Oh, it's a good take.
Yes.
I'm assuming we're evaluating Greg's take.
Yes, that is, yeah, that's correct.
Casually, Greg's take is spot on. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Like this article's trying to say, like, well, if Bush is a war criminal, then all these guys, was it wrong of us to bomb Nagasaki? Was it wrong of us to spread chemical warfare in Vietnam? It's like, yeah, it was wrong, and all the presidents that authorized that made it possible and that made it happen are guilty of war crimes. I think we posted out a meme one time where it's like, yeah, I agree. Trump is guilty of war crimes, but so are Bush, Obama, Clinton. Everyone basically all the way back to since forever. these presidents, whenever they do war in such a way that has not been authorized by Congress, like at the very minimum, right, is a war crime, right? They're overstepping their breach, and then you have to actually get into, is it a just war? Should we be hopping off of our, if it's not on our own soil, should we be going somewhere else? It's like in almost every case, no, we shouldn't be going anywhere else to fight. We should only be defending our own soil.
It's funny. I just looked this up, and this article was written in 2014 by a fellow named H.A. Goodman, who was writing different articles at the time for like Salon, Huffington Post, but he's a conservative, if you couldn't guess based on the title of the tweet. And he had his YouTube channel. So I checked up on his YouTube channel, and he's still going strong there, and he's posting a lot of pro-Trump content. And I just have to wonder how he's reconciled Trump calling out, Bush and the Bush family in particular as creating some of the biggest mistakes ever by their foreign invasions. Because it seems here that this is defending that. And of course, the best thing one of the best things Trump ever did was made it sort of okay in the Republican Party to be anti-war. Whether or not he lived up by those ideals, you can argue back and forth. He didn't start any new wars, but he certainly continued bombings in Yemen and whatnot, which I would argue makes him a war criminal. But at the very least, he tried not to expand it. I don't know if that was incidental or if it was on purpose. But as to his credit, he was less war hawky than his predecessors. But regardless, it's just funny to me because it seemed like because Trump went that way, a lot of lefties had to flip, and a lot of righties had to flip too.
Yeah.
And so, good on this individual for. It seems like they're probably a left person just based on that. They have the rainbow flag in their name, which isn't to say you couldn't be other oriented. It's just kind of a common association there. But good on him if he is in fact on the left side to tweet this out, because honestly these days it's not popular to say things like Truman, Obama, and LBJ are war criminals, and it's especially not popular to imply that if you're continuing the policies, which Biden is, then your current president, who is in the party in power, is also a war criminal. It's really funny to me when a writer in the original tweet here with H.A. Goodman, when when you make the enemy your opponent's case so well, obviously you want to get back to rebutting each of those points. That's the idea. But when you're able to take this kind of a small screenshot, it's just such a cell phone. And I used to be in the debates, collegiate debate. I used to be a judge and help coach and stuff. And one of the things I would always caution against is, it's good to give ground, to say, all right, well, my side may have these flaws, but it's better because XYZ, whatever. But the problem is sometimes students would take that too far, and they'd be, sure, my plan has flaws. Like, well, okay, if we're going to say Bush is a war criminal, then so is Truman, LBJ, Nixon, and Obama. And, that would mean that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were wrong. And that would mean Agent Orange in Vietnam or secret bombing. You just keep listing all of the problems and flaws with your worldview. You've probably punched a little too many holes in your own case for it to seem strong. And I think that's what's kind of going on here.
Yeah, it's interesting the point you make about like how the sides have flipped, especially I think about like the COVID stuff. Like in March of this year, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe, and we were going through the airport, and COVID stuff was still going strong. And I was just thinking about, like, I remember a time, my dad was a flight attendant, where I could just go to the gate, like, and watch him leave on a plane. You didn't have all this security stuff or all the rigmarole of you need to have a pass or anything. It was like, hey, you go through, you walk through a metal detector, and you can go watch and see whoever you want off onto a plane. And then obviously 9/11 happened, right? And I'm sure that a lot of the restrictions that happened during 9/11 were very like, like, oh, this is only temporary, right? Or whatever. But I know a lot of conservatives were like, oh, we need to lock down, do all these different things. And it's like, now fast forward, 20 years flying out. It's like, oh, we've just accepted it, right? That this is normal. And I remember having a little bit of a sad moment thinking like, man, like that was like comparatively, right? Like been very traumatizing, very sad. But comparatively, not a lot of people died compared to COVID, at least what they're saying, right? Like they're saying millions of people died from COVID. Like what makes us think that the stuff that they've implemented in COVID is not going to stick around? And so it's really interesting to me to talk to conservatives now, who are very much like, no, this is overreach and all this stuff. It's like, well, no, back then, you were supporting Bush and you were supporting all the giving up of liberties to be safe and all this stuff. It's two sides of the same exact coin, right? One is just terrorism, giving up liberties to be safe from terrorism. The other is giving up safety to be safe from some virus, or giving up liberty to be safe from a virus. So yeah, I think what's been great about this season, though, and with all this stuff, is that people have woken up, right? And a lot of the American heroes, or so we're told, Truman, FDR, Reagan, LBJ, not as much LBJ, but all these folks, they're like, oh no, they're awful, they're bad. The deaths of millions are on their hands, and if they spoke Russian, and they were in the 80s, like, we would view them as war criminals, and if they did the same actions. So it's a good thing. A lot of people.
It is a good thing, and I do want to correct casually. Greg is a conservative individual, from what I can tell. So, not the analysis that you gave isn't inaccurate, but my guess there is. So, but yeah, and ultimately, all of what you're saying leads to, of course, the reality that you need to have principles. You can't just rely on political parties or even political personalities. I mean, it's one thing to follow a political personality and find their work interesting, and when they change or when they evolve or adapt, listen to their reasoning, and you can be persuaded, but it can't just be a matter of, well, this person used to be this way and now they're this way, so I'm just going to follow and agree with them. You have to be convinced too, and you can't just make it a cult of personality. You can't make it a cult of party. It's kind of hard, but honestly, reevaluation of the world around you every time you get new information is kind of critical to staying sharp anyway. So it's kind of something you just got to do. All right, moving on to our next post. This one comes from a bigger discussion, but the last two tweets in it I found entertaining. So the first one reads, "Slaves were always persons. The unborn never have never been. Changing that will require an amendment, which will never happen. Demographics are against it, and granting the unborn rights will make women less equal under the law than you. That will never fly." And of course, this was, slaves were always persons was in response to the argument that slaves were, not granted legal rights as persons as well. And so the response comes from pro-life libertarian, who responds, "You are saying that the unborn need the law to become a person, while simultaneously claiming that blacks were persons, even though the law said they weren't. Pick a lane and stay in it." And we are evaluating the last tweet here. Britt, what do you think?
Pro-life libertarian. I mean, obviously, I think it's a good one.
Yes.
I am very much on the side of the unborn. I think it's Seamus from Freedom Tunes has this saying that, like, in the arc of history, it usually bends towards people that didn't have rights and not being recognized as persons eventually getting rights and being recognized as persons. And so I have a lot of hope about that in regards to the unborn. Likewise, usually the people that are not recognizing some life form as a person are usually the people that are on the bad side and on the wrong side of it. So this is a really solid take. It's a really solid rebuttal because everyone can agree that slavery was wrong. Also, at the time, the culture and the laws and everything around it did not validate slaves as people. So the thing that had to trump it was some sort of principle that could be clearly articulated. And this guy does a really fantastic job of articulating, like, look, like, yeah, the unborn don't need a law to be considered people, just like slaves didn't need a law to be considered people. That principle stood regardless of whether the culture, the majority, or the government admitted that it, or acknowledged that it did. And so I really like the take. I like the response. I think this should be filed away in anyone's handbook for when people say things like this.
Yeah, and this is a great highlighting of the sort of inconsistency people can have as they're saying things. A lot of the times, you almost have to highlight people's cognitive dissonance from various statements or various places they've been in an argument or other positions they've had sort of over the past course of however long you've been talking. It's very, I think, at least most of the time, if you're having a coherent discussion with someone, it's very rare to get someone with the cognitive dissonance so strong that it's in the same breath that you can point out, if you're saying X, then you can't believe Y. And that's exactly what's happening in this tweet above. And I think he's very succinctly points this out. He's saying slaves were always persons. The unborn never have been, and changing that would require an amendment. which is to say, slaves were always persons. The unborn never have been until the law is changed. And at that point, will they start becoming persons? Because you're completely denying that exact reality in the case of slaves. You're not saying that slaves were not persons until the legal rights changed. You're saying slaves were always persons. And it seems like you're saying that if the law were to change, that would somehow change the
Change his
validity.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it would change them his mind on unborn persons. And then he's saying why it would never happen.
He's
And
very
and let me
persuadable.
yeah, and let me just say that if your ethic for what is or what currently exists is defined by an arguing of the negative of things that well, this will never happen to make it so, you might need to reevaluate it, right? To say, well, this, and that's sometimes it's more difficult than others to avoid that, but generally speaking, if your ethic is, you know the unborn will only be a life, in my opinion, if the majority changes their mind on it. Well, that's a really shaky foundation for your belief. That should not be the core of your belief, the core reason why you believe. I mean, frankly, as a Christian, if my core reason for believing was only that, well, Christianity hasn't died so far, so it must be true, that would also be a pretty bad singular reason. Now, that can add in to your perspective, and if he was saying that, you know, I think that a majority of people probably are wrong in this issue. Based on the majority of scientific doctors that I read, hold this view. That would be an additive to your argument, maybe. I don't think it's a particularly strong one, but it can't be the core because that's not again, it's not a pillar of reality. That's not a pillar of what is. That's a pillar of what currently is, and what currently is can change at any point. So you can't base reality purely on what is, and that's also the problem with the argument of viability. It's not a life until it's viable. Well, that's based on what currently is real, and that can change at any point. So you've just again
Yep.
drawn an arbitrary distinction about what is reality
That's
from
a great
an
point.
ever shifting point of view, or reality based on what our technological progress is.
Yeah, I really like that point. I'll have to file that one away for myself. The other part of this one that makes me kind of sad actually is that he goes the unborn, a woman classifying the unborn as a human makes it so that women are less equal under the law
Oh yeah.
and all these things. It's like, man, like you got to be really careful about saying something like that because there's so many things that exist, responsibilities that do make you less equal depending on what your value system and value set is. But like this can also be applied to just children in general and not just to women, but to men, right? Like we assume, like currently as the law stands, if the human baby is born into this world and grows up to be 5 years old, it is wrong. We all know it is wrong for that parent to either abandon that child, throw them out into the wilderness, out of their house, or to kill them. We recognize all three of those as wrong, both from a moral standpoint. For the most part, there might be people that don't, and then from a legal standpoint. And so it's like, but the same principle that person is advocating for applies to that situation, right? Like by all means, like if something makes you less equal under the law, it's a little bit of a drag upon your ability to perform things or to do things that we think are human rights. Taking care of another human being, sacrificing when they can't give back to you. It's like you can justify murdering or abandoning that child at 5 years old. It's the same thing. And that's the danger of not having a principle run all the way through your ideology.
That's absolutely right. That's a great point. Okay, moving on. We have a tweet from Rick Wilson where he quote retweets President Biden. President Biden tweeted, "I just want to make a few things clear. The Holocaust happened. Hitler was a demonic figure. And instead of giving it a platform, our political leaders should be calling out and rejecting anti Semitism wherever it hides. Silence is complicity." And Rick Wilson tweets saying, "That's a presidential tweet. Full stop. Perfect." What do you think, Britt? Do you think
uh,
this is a good tweet, or are you a racist Nazi?
I mean, I guess to bring it back to our old podcast, it's just cringy, dude. Like it's a bad take and it's bad in a cringy way. It's like this took zero courage to do. Like I don't buy into, ooh, you're presidential or anything like that. I don't buy into that bull crap. But I do buy into things of courage and being courageous. And the fact of the matter is that Kanye West probably has a lot more courage than Biden does. And if you like put up like who stands more to lose from what they said,
Right.
right? I don't like what Ye said at all. I'm not saying any of that. Like I don't like that. But like he's paying a price for what he said. Biden pays zero price for saying any of the stuff that we all accept, we all agree that the Holocaust happened, that Hitler was awful, that a lot of Jews died, and that we should be really protective of individual rights. Biden doesn't seem to want to apply that, to people outside of certain groups that are advantageous. People like the unvaccinated, you could say. But his silence, I guess, in those people losing their jobs and all that stuff is complicity in being very awful towards them as well. But it's just not courageous, man. Like everyone, it did you see the I don't know if I sent this to you, the Hitler to Casper sleep mattress Twitter thread?
I don't think
Oh
so.
my god, it is so funny, dude. Like, so it's basically this tweet thread. It's Hitler, a thread, and it's this some guy. It's like these really infographic-y things that are kind of nice. It's like Hitler grew up in whatever Germany, and he was an artist, and then he started being anti-Semitic, and he hated the Jews, and he rose to power, and a really big part of that was he was addicted to methamphetamines, which made it really hard for him to sleep. And then like the next one was like, and that's why you should really prioritize your sleep with a Casper sleep. It's really funny. I'll send it to you after, man. But
That's
it's just like
amazing.
that's at least funny, right? But it's like it's playing off the like we all know this about Hitler, and that's why you should get a Casper sleep mattress. That's funny. Doesn't take a lot of courage to say, but it takes about the same amount of courage as President Biden saying what he's saying here.
Yeah, you know, I I hate to file this under accidentally based. It's almost like we need an inverse where it's like kind of accidentally cringe, but like this, Rick Wilson isn't wrong in the sense that it is kind of a presidential tweet, which is it's a lot of nothing. Um, Presidential tweets don't tend to actually be that meaningful.
Yeah,
And so
sure,
it is
sure.
kind of a presidential tweet. But yeah, I mean, it's a bad take in the sense that he means it. And he really means that this is a good, brave, noble thing to say. And substituting the word for presidential tweet as like maybe like heroic or a leader, because like regardless of you know you and I don't love the idea of a government structure with mandated leaders that are voted on democratically. But in any system you have, there are going to be people who are leaders, who are, strong and inspirational. And you want people like that in a culture and society. So, giving benefit of the doubt, let's sub that in for presidential tweet and say, is this heroic, or is this a tweet of a leader? And I mean, Biden's tweet isn't wrong. It's not bad. I don't love the silence is complicity point. I don't think you should ever really dunk on people for not speaking up on something. I think that's a little bit of like the silence is consenting kind of rapey language that I don't love, that comes out of some people on the left who want to mandate your speech. But that being said, like yeah, like Hitler was a horrible demonic figure. Anti-Semitism is stupid and wrong. And yeah, the Holocaust happened. So Biden's tweet, other than the silence is complicity thing, yeah, it's not wrong. I wouldn't even criticize Biden for tweeting it in any real sense. But like you said, it's not that brave. It's not that heroic. To me, it's kind of like standard boilerplate. Yep, you're the president. A major cultural figure said something like that. Probably got to respond in that way. I kind of wish that there are ways to make a tweet like this heroic. There are ways to say something more, which is to say, you know, I mean, have a take more similar to Spike's, which is to lay out all this. Say this, the Holocaust happened. Hitler was demonic. We shouldn't be raising anti-Semitism anywhere. And then follow up by saying you can acknowledge that good things happen from evil, bad causes. If you're going to go the theistic route, God uses good to come from evil origins all the time. And so to recognize that Hitler created some things that we benefit from now is in no way to apologize for his awful behavior, is in no way to praise him for being a good person or having these laudable characteristics. And we shouldn't confuse the two. There are ways to make a statement like this more meaningful and better. And so the fact that this just kind of gets Rick Wilson tickled kind of shows you the kind of depth that Rick Wilson looks for in a leader.
I think people confuse like being right and being courageous a lot of the time. It's like
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to be right to be courageous. Like there are plenty of courageous people that are on the wrong side of things all the time. Courage just means the ability to, it's not the absence of fear, it's the ability to stand in the presence of fear and march forward regardless. And that is true whether or not you are on the good side or the bad side. Um, and so, like, yeah, Biden is saying the right thing. Like, this is Hitler, like you're saying, it was wrong. The Holocaust happened. All of it is evil and bad. But there is no fear. Like, if I went out anywhere in the United States, basically anywhere, and I said that, I would not fear for my life. As opposed to if I went to downtown Seattle in, late 2020, early 2021, I said, I'm not vaccinated. I'm not going to get vaccinated. And all of you people that are getting vaccinated should not be able to tell me that I should get vaccinated. Like, I would genuinely be a little bit worried about my ability to get out of downtown Seattle without at least getting a little bit, harassed, potentially even assaulted, right? There are folks down there that were for like the pro not the pro vaccine but the anti-vax mandate stuff, protests and stuff, they were assaulted and stuff. So stuff like that, regardless of whether you think one way or the other, that would actually take courage, right, to go do something like that, because it comes with implicit threat that there could be violence or harassment accompanying it. No one is getting on Biden for saying that, so therefore it's not courageous. And and I'm assuming the presidential part is a stand-in for courageous.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, the last thing I'll say is, as we said, not again, not the worst tweet. It's not wrong specifically, but for Rick Wilson to think that this is what should be coming out of the White House, that is the real problem. Like, if this is the kind of, I don't know, the peak of what you're expecting, then my goodness, that no wonder Rick Wilson, would love Romney. People who aren't saying anything that's disruptive, anything that's bold or brave, anything that's worth saying. Sometimes there are things like this that are worth saying technically. But when you look around the world, when we see the absolute monstrosity that was the COVID response, when we see the absolute terror that is the bombings that we're doing across the world and have been for some time, when we see the creepy authoritarian infringing on free speech that the government's trying to do, there are a lot more dangerous, pressing things that we need out of a leader that would make me happy to hear from. Not, hey, this opinion everyone has. Let's reiterate it to force out bad ideas. That's that's fine, but that's not the perfect tweet. So,
Yep.
sorry, Rick, bad take. Okay, we've got this this exchange kind of made me go back and forth in terms of what I was expecting out of it, and I kind of kept shaking my head out of confused surprise, I suppose. So it starts with Joe Walsh, as all confusing things do. Um, and he's quote tweeting himself, and then there's a reply to that. So it's kind of got a little bit of inception going. But the first Joe Walsh tweet reads, per the Supreme Court of the United States case today, I ask this only to spur conversation. Should the government be able to force a Jewish graphic designer to design invitations to a "the Holocaust was a hoax" party, or force a Muslim designer to design a "Muhammad was a pedophile" poster? I say no. So,
Great
so
take.
far, Joe Walsh is better on this than Gary Johnson. Take that as you will.
Oh,
Uh, he quote tweets himself. So I'm like, okay, I'm pro Joe Walsh right now. This is great. Way to go, buddy. Then he quote tweets himself and kind of makes the victory a little bitter in your mouth. Apologies for offending anyone with my tweet below. It was way too flippant. I fear government force against individual speech and expression. Businesses rightly can't refuse any service to anyone because of race, sex, sexual orientation, etc. This services/speech issue is at SCOTUS today. So, right after
what a
having the right
weakling.
take, he steps it right back and then basically says, "Oh, you know what? But in this particular case, it's okay because the government can force them because of someone's identity or whatever." That Okay, that has no bearing. just there's this arbitrary distinction of it's who I am. It doesn't matter if it's who you are. There are plenty of things that make me me besides my skin color, and a lot of it has to do with my ideas. So, in a sense, you're almost dehumanizing people more by saying that, oh, it's only their skin color, or you know their sexual proclivities that makes them who they are, and then you can't discriminate. That's wild to me. So then the actress Jane Lynch, which I was very startled to see this coming from someone from Hollywood, but she responds, because apparently she follows Joe Walsh. I have no idea why, or at least saw it somehow. Why in the first place would a gay couple want a homophobic bakery to make their wedding cake? I wouldn't want to eat a mouthful of their hate on my wedding day. Find another bakery or make your own dang wedding cake. Okay. So getting through all that, Britt, where are we?
I
feel
don't
like
know.
I'm lost.
Are we? I guess we're evaluating Jane's
Yes.
tweet.
Yes. We're evaluating.
Great
things. We
take.
can talk about all of them. Yeah.
That's a good take. I mean, that's the argument in a nutshell. And I think that, I mean, we've talked about the Master Cake Shop case a few times on here, but the couple that sued Jack from there literally sought out the specific shop that they could go to, that they knew the owner was a Christian and that had very specific moral values, whereas all these other wedding cake places would make them a cake. And Jack didn't even refuse them service. He didn't even refuse them service based on like that their gender identity or sexual orientation. He simply refused, hey, I don't make that type of wedding cake. I'll make you any type of cake you want, but I won't make a cake with that specific design because I can't participate in it and I don't want to draw that. And Joe Walsh's first take is awesome because it very much hits on that. It's like it's the equivalent of going to a Jewish baker and saying, hey, make me a cake with a swastika on it or a Holocaust was fake party thing on it. It's the same exact thing. And no, we don't think anyone should be forced to make anything that they don't want to make for anyone that they don't want to make it for. And yeah, you can think that it's awful and terrible and their reasons for doing it are bad. Why would you want to buy from them in the first place? And that's why Jane's tweet is so good and so based. Is it's like, yeah, like if someone hates you that much, like why would you want them handling your food if you think that they hate you that much? I mean, that's to me, I'm getting worried about people that I like handling my food because they might be careless, much less someone that I thought hated me. So,
I remember sort of learning when I was younger, and I was, interested in going on dates with women and things like that. And I remember being taught pretty early on this idea that, like, look, you might like someone, but you are not entitled to them liking you back. Just because you harbor affection for someone doesn't mean that they have to reciprocate that back to you. And that's something, when I was dating and maybe got rejected a couple times, like I had to keep in mind. It's like, this sucks, this is sad, but just because I really like them and maybe they don't feel anything back towards me in that way, I'm not entitled to that. And it seems like that kind of thread is missing from a lot of people's conscience when it comes to commerce, because in their mind, something like a grocery store or a bakery shop or a florist or whatever it is, they just exist as an entity that is disconnected from people somehow. And this is a business. It's not a person. A corporation isn't a person. Beep boop. I'm an NPC who's repeating everything the mainstream media says to me. And they feel like it's disconnected. And because now it is a business, because they say, we sell this if you give us this, they are entitled to that, as though the business, by setting itself up, has signed a contract with every person on earth that because I am a business, I am entitled, or I am required to take your money or required to give you the service if you give me the money. They take the complete consent out of everything. And to me, it's to say, maybe that's the expectation, but that shouldn't be the expectation. There shouldn't be this government imposed mandate that if a business says there is a menu and they don't want to sell to you, they can't. I mean, as much as it's frustrating and infuriating, like why do we think it's okay that the government gets to enslave people in that way? That because it is, if someone doesn't want to sell something that they're making to an individual, they shouldn't have to. I mean, I think of like an example of, there was we're going back to my very niche example of Nintendo and fighting game communities, but there's two people who were had a lot of animosity towards each other. And one guy actually made a product which was a sort of technical gadget to help with controllers and controller configurations. And this other guy who really, really did not like this first guy who made the product, he wanted to buy one because he was going to try to sort of sabotage the business by making his own or highlighting flaws or whatever, kind of reverse engineering it. And he went around, to a different, like one of the employees of the guy who made it to try to buy it from him without the top guy knowing. The top guy found out and stopped it from before he handed it over. He's like, no, this guy is just literally going to try to undermine my business. And according to these people, he should not have been able to do that. If guy B wanted to sabotage guy A by buying his product and then doing whatever, that should have been allowed. And to me, it's like, no, businesses are full of real humans and customers are real humans, and there has to be a consent on both sides of that equation for it to make sense and for it to work. The government has no business forcing people in either case.
Yeah, I mean, the taken to the logical extreme, like I should be able to come up to you, Donnie, and say, and maybe you have some skill in this or something. I don't know. And even then, I'm even more entitled to it. But like, build me an engine. You have two
Yeah.
hands. You know how to plug things in and use a drill. Like, I will pay you $100,000 to build me an engine. And you're like, well, dude, I don't know how to build an engine. I don't know. Maybe you do, like I was saying. But
No.
um, uh, but it's like, and then when you say no, I can't. That's not something I do, right? I can say you're just a freaking racist. You must hate half Filipino people like me, or people that are over 6 foot. Like you hate people like me, and you heightist and racist jerk. And it's like you're not entitled to people's labor, right? I'm not entitled to someone's labor. I'm entitled after I pay, right? Like if I pay for a service, then yeah, I'm entitled. But if that person never accepts the money, if they say, hey, I don't do this thing or I don't want to do this certain thing, what makes you think that you have the right to demand it from them, much less try to claim the moral high ground like they're an awful person for not giving it to you? Maybe they are, right? Like I've had experiences where I saw my dad and my brother and I. My dad's quite a bit darker than I am, but refuse service in an establishment because of the color of his skin. I've seen that happen. And my dad just said, my dad told the person, you suck. I'm going to leave a bad review. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that you're a racist. And it's like, okay, that's fair, right? But he didn't go to the government and say, hey, like, I want to go buy this thing from this person. He's just like, no, I can leave a Google review and everyone's going to read it. And then anyone that is a person of color that walks in here is going to know, and that's how things are dealt with in the real market. And then the people that are racist can go frequent that space, and the people that want to get the best price or whatever can go someplace else. Yeah, people are best left up to their own decisions. They don't need to be told.
R- Right. Well, and in the case of that example, it's like the stores that want to attract more customers are going to have policies that they self-enforce. So, they might have their own policy, which is to say, our policy is that we offer every individual the same price for the same product and don't refuse service. And guess what? That makes it more attractive for a wider bevy of people because it's like I'm going to go in there and know that they're going to honor their own rules. Um, I think about a time when, not for any racial reasons, but I was discriminated against. It's funny. It was during college. It was with some friends. You would know some of them, and one of them had bought an airsoft, or I think it was an airsoft gun. It was some sort of like gun. I don't think it was a paintball gun. I'm pretty sure it was airsoft. But anyway, um, and it jammed, so he wanted to return it. And so he goes back to the store. It was a Big Five, I believe, and according to their policy, if you don't have the receipt but you have the item and it's within a certain day, they can look up the transaction and you can get in-store credit. So they had the receipt, but it was partially torn off. So they tried to, return it, and they said, no, we're not going to honor that because the receipt is torn up. And they're like, okay, the only part of the receipt that's missing is the date. And you can look up the transaction in your system and see that, but they're like, no, we're not going to honor that. And it's like, fine, fine. Well, according to your policy, we should get in-store credit. And they refused to honor it. They refused to honor their own policy. And so we got pretty mad about that because we were like, what do you mean? It's like, it's your policy's on your website right here. Let's say we don't have this receipt. That's fine. We would like to exchange this for store credit. There's the model that you're selling. It's right there. And they just refused. And they eventually were going to call the cops to evict us because we were like, no, like this is your policy. What are you talking about? So, um, what do I do? I talk bad about Big Five to all my friends. I, reported them to the Better Business Bureau. But I wasn't going around saying government needs to step in here. They have to make them honor that. The government needs to come and shut them down. I've been targeted and discriminated as a white, teen male or something. I don't know. Yeah, like
with no receipt.
yeah, well, with a receipt, with 90%
with a receipt,
of
but
a
no
receipt.
date. Yeah.
90% of the receipt, no date. But whatever it is, the point is, it's like I never frequented that store. I talked bad about them, and they actually went out of business. I think they maybe got bought or something like that, but they went bankrupt or something not that long after, which was pretty
Nice.
funny.
Must have been because of you. So
I like to think of it, but to me, it's like a business with bad practices like that. Like if that was the MO of all Big Fives is to not honor their policies, they probably
will go out of
alienated
business.
a lot of people. And I mean, there were, I'm not a big sports guy, but there were actually quite a few times when I needed to get stuff, and Big Five was one of those options, and I chose not to go there.
Yeah.
So, the market has a way of sorting these things out, and you really do need to rely more on that kind of thing than government forcing transactions to occur that don't make sense, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one, and take care until then.